On this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, we discuss the latest news in the ASC industry, including a discussion of OSHA 300 reporting, reviewing the difference between a policy and a protocol, a discussion about the Medical Advisory or Executive Committee, and in our focus segment, we discuss credentialing and privileging and interview Amanda Penrod with RFX Solutions about credentialing documentation pitfalls.
Welcome to the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, the longest-running podcast specifically focused on the freestanding ambulatory surgery industry. We would like to thank our sponsors, Surgical Information Systems, providing cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable data insights. MedServe, which is the only digital narcotic cabinet specifically designed and priced for surgery centers, helping standardize processes and compliance, eliminate paper logs, and prevent drug diversion. And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, visit our website at ascpodcast.com.
Welcome to episode 224 of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle for June 26, 2024, recording from our studios in Spencerport, New York. This is Sue Cronkite, co-host of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle and Operations Manager for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. We would like to remind our listeners that the ASC regulatory environment is a rapidly evolving landscape, and the materials presented in this episode are based on the most current information available as of the date of recording. As such, it's important to recognize that this information may be subject to change, and we advise all ASCs to stay up to date with the latest regulations and guidelines issued by their relevant regulatory bodies. And joining me today is John Goehle, the owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies and one of the most respected experts in the ambulatory surgery industry. With over 30 years of experience, Mr. Goehle has authored over 10 books on the ASC industry, and he is a sought-after speaker on regulatory accreditation and finance issues.
So let's just start off by pointing out that Rosie's puppies, those of you that follow the podcast know that Rosie is our mascot for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies on the ASC Podcast, and she pretty much grew up on the screen while we were doing our various conferences over the years. So she celebrated the second birthday of her first litter of puppies last week, and we had an awful lot of fun. One of our owners owns a puppy named Meredith, and we had two other puppies. So we had a total of 3 of the puppies from that litter as well as Rosie. So, and of course, things like this always involve an awful lot of food, don't they?
I know, they do. Well, she actually always does a special little cupcake or treat that is made by some bakery somewhere for the dogs.
Right,
so they all got, I think it was peanut butter frosting on a little cupcake, and lots of food for the humans. So
that's right.
Definitely was a fun time.
Do they call it a pupcake?
I think they did.
Yeah, that did not last very long. Rosie gobbled it right down, but it was a lot of fun, and we're hoping Rosie will come into season pretty soon so we can have another litter of puppies, but that doesn't seem to be happening very quickly. And I did my first survey, Sue, with AAHC using the new 1095 Engage software. It was a little challenging because I'm sometimes technologically challenged, especially since I've been doing these surveys for quite a number of years, a couple decades now. And I started out doing surveys using paper, so it's been a long transition.
Plus, you really haven't had your training for that yet, right? Until
after I actually did the survey. I do enjoy the new software. It really integrates things. I think it'll make the survey process much quicker, but it's a learning curve. And I encourage those of you that are going through a AAHC survey in the near term to have patience with those surveyors as they get used to using this new software. But there's just so many advantages with this new system that I really think AAHC has done a great job of putting this together. I know it's been painful, for the organizations also as they've had to go through this transition. But definitely in the end, I think we're going to have a great new software experience. And Sue, I did double check CMS again. We have not had any CMS updates for quite a while. I do go to the website for CMS and look for any memos to the states that involve regulations or regulatory changes. And I think we should be happy, though, that there have been no changes. But you and I have been kind of holding off on the survey guide. We're working to revise the survey guide, a publication that I've been writing for well over a decade now. And I think we're just going to have to publish the 2024 version now, assuming that we're not going to see any major changes during 2024. Now, when we were preparing this podcast, we were noticing there really isn't a lot of news right now. So we really just have one news piece, and then we have a number of issues that we do want to talk about coming out of some recent experiences. So, Sue, what is the news that you found this week?
Okay. So I just really found a couple of articles that I thought were kind of interesting from ShiftKey, which is a healthcare technology marketplace platform. Not exactly sure what that all means, but they published the results of a study that looked into what influenced newer nurses to go into the field, or those who were considering becoming nurses but decided not to. What helped them make their decisions. They found that social media is very influential in Gen Z career decisions, with 66% of Gen Zers saying they had used social media for career research, and 16% rated it as their top source for information. Unfortunately for healthcare, of the almost 750,000 nursing-related posts on TikTok from November of 23 to May of 24, 64% were negative. They noted concerns about patient issues and mental health issues that can come from working in this field. 78% of Gen Zers who avoided nursing said that more positive social media content could have changed their decision. Other influences included family, especially if there was a family member that was in nursing, nursing TV shows or, TV shows about healthcare also were a positive influence. Many were put off by the hours and the lack of flexibility. So there is, kind of an issue with people coming up and deciding whether to get into this. Now, one positive finding was that Gen Zers all really said they were looking for ways to make a positive impact with their career choices. So I feel like it's seemed like for a little while people were going into nursing for the money, and it might be going back into, trying to really wanting to make a positive impact. So the more we can, you're talking to people that or, just spreading the good things about nursing might be helpful in addressing, the shortage that we've got right now.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking we did an interview during the New Jersey State Association meeting with an individual who was talking about using social media. Might not be a bad interview to put on the podcast for our national audience also, because it does sound, based upon this article, that we really need to be putting some very positive messages out there about nursing and about ambulatory surgery centers in particular. And I don't think we spend a lot of time doing that. As a matter of fact, most of us are so busy just running surgery centers that we don't think much about the ways in which Gen Zers get information, both from the standpoint of coming into nursing as well as being patients. So more to come on that. Let's keep an eye out for some ways that we can talk to our audience about that.
And the next article I found was about AI. So in Becker's Health IT from May 16th, they mentioned nurses are becoming concerned about AI in healthcare. And I know we've talked a little bit about the role it could be in privacy and different
We're talking about
like
artificial intelligence, of course. So.
Yes, sorry. In the survey they were presenting, half of the nurses said their employers use algorithms to rate patients' acuity and the number of nursing hours that would be needed. 69% of those nurses said that the AI assessment didn't align with their own, as AI can't account for the educational, emotional, psychosocial needs of the patients. Some facilities were using AI to assist in nurse handoff. Almost half of those nurses, again, said that their assessments didn't match the computers. The nurses also noted that they were unable to change or update the information based on their own judgment.
So it sounds, I think, what the outcome here is that AI is not really ready for prime time yet in the nursing assessment role.
And I don't know if it ever will be completely. I mean, I think nurses should always at least have that ability to change something.
Right. Yeah. So, well, I think we're going to be talking about AI quite a bit over the next couple years. So this is interesting that we at least had the first survey of this type here. And we'll try to keep people up to date. Maybe we'll try to get an interview with somebody that can talk about AI in the surgery center space. We've had quite a number of experiences recently that we just want to talk about. One thing that came up this last week was single providers and the need to have an outside peer review performed. So if you are working for a surgery center where the owner is the only provider in that surgery center, or if you have a provider that is the only one in that particular specialty, you're going to have to go outside of your organization to get peer review performed, because peer review has to be performed, by somebody other than the person being reviewed, as well as somebody in that profession or in that specialty. So, for example, we have a situation where a urologist is the only urologist working for a particular surgery center, and we're going to be matching up that urologist with a urologist in one of our other centers so that they can do an appropriate peer review. So just remember, you have to have like providers performing peer review for like providers. Another issue that came up in the last week is the issue of the Medical Advisory Committee and the Medical Executive Committee. We've mentioned this a few times during the podcast that it's very important that you review your medical staff bylaws. Many organizations have not looked at their medical staff bylaws in quite a number of years. And indeed, I've seen medical staff bylaws that have never been revised since the organization was founded. Review those medical staff bylaws and see what it says with regard to your various committees in your organization, including the medical advisory committee or the medical executive committee. Those two terms, by the way, are usually synonymous. And where we tend to have problems is with the recommendations coming from the medical advisory committee or medical executive committee to the governing body. You have to remember that the conditions for coverage and interpretive guidelines require that the decision to grant privileges by the governing body has to be based upon the advice of a physician. And the medical advisory committee, medical executive committee makes that pretty easy because that provides a panel of individuals that can make that recommendation. If you don't have that committee, then you're going to have to make sure that you have an appropriate representation for each of the specialties in your organization and have that documented in the credential file that then gets sent to the governing body with a recommendation for approval. Medical executive and the medical advisory committee make it easier, especially if you have an issue with the governing body where the governing body includes non-physicians. There are some organizations that can get away with having a governing body / medical executive committee when all of the members of the governing body are actually the medical staff of the organization. But be very careful with that. Another issue came up recently with regard to the difference between a policy and a protocol. Policy is something that does not change. It's approved by the governing body, and it's very rare. Policy should not be something that's changed every week or every month even. Mm-hmm. It's something that's going to be in place for a long period of time. A protocol, however, provides information to the staff on how to actually carry out a function. We find that very often policy manuals are full of protocols. And that really makes it very difficult to keep that policy manual up to date. So I guess the best thing I can do is give an example. A protocol provides details about how to carry out a policy. So the best example perhaps is wave testing. A policy would be that wave testing is performed and indicates who performs it in your organization. A protocol, on the other hand, would provide details about how to actually perform that wave testing. Please do not include that type of detail in the policy itself. And because you will find yourself in a situation when you change the wave testing. For example, if you're using a different urine pregnancy test, you're going to have to go back and change the policy every time that you change that wave testing. So the advantage of pulling protocols outside of your policy manual is it will make your policy manual a lot shorter and much more succinct. So definitely keep an eye on that. And another issue that came up this last week was OSHA and the annual log posting. ASCs are not required to actually post the OSHA 300A form on an annual basis, like many organizations are. They do need to keep logs of the injuries, and I'm going to provide a link to the information about this. So ambulatory surgery centers are not required to post the OSHA 300A form on an annual basis because there's a specific exemption for various North American industry classification systems. And ambulatory surgery centers are included in that list. And I have verified this also with the corporate counsel for the ASC Association. Now, that being said, if you do have more than 250 employees in your ambulatory surgery center, which I think would be very rare, then you will have to not only post the OSHA Form 300A, but you're also going to have to do an electronic submission of that form. Again, I'll provide a link to all this information. Now, however, all employees, including those partially exempted, like we just talked about, by reason of company size or industry classification, must report to OSHA any workplace incident that results in a fatality, an inpatient hospitalization, an amputation, or a loss of an eye. And those reports have to be done within 24 hours. So if any of those situations actually occur for one of your employees, do make sure that you follow the OSHA regulations. And the OSHA website provides a lot of information on how to do that. And I'll provide a link to that in the show notes. We haven't talked about credentialing except to talk about MPDB, which I think we did a couple months ago for a while. So I thought we would focus today on credentialing. Now, one thing that came up this last week is the issue of timeframes for credentialing. And this actually happened because in New York State, New York actually changed the regulation that allowed hospitals to credential providers on a triennial basis, in other words, every 3 years. However, there still is a requirement that ambulatory surgery centers do that recredentialing every 2 years. And that brought up the question among some of our clients and some of our listeners about who takes precedence, because the accreditation organizations do allow up to 3 years for credentialing. But if your state does have a shorter time frame, you need to make sure that you're following the state regulations. So again, it's very important when you're going through your credentialing to make sure your policies match what your accreditation organization states and that you keep up to date with what's going on in your state.
I think really as a general rule with any regulations, whichever one that applies to you that is more stringent or stricter is what you always have to follow.
That's correct. That's correct. So I thought that during our focus segment today, we would talk about credentialing. So let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about credentialing, and that's going to include an interview with our friend Amanda Penrod from RFX Solutions. With the rapid changes occurring in the ASC industry, the exodus of experienced ASC administrators, nurse managers, and business office managers, there is an increasing demand for quality leadership education. That's where our industry-leading boot camps come in. In 2021, we introduced our Administrator Boot Camp and the Director of Nursing Boot Camp, and in 2023, the Business Office Manager Boot Camp. These boot camps have become the industry standard for ASC leadership training, and with over 225 graduates, lead the industry in mentored virtual training.
Live virtual training for the Administrator Boot Camp occurs every January and July, and the Director of Nursing Boot Camp is October and May. Our new Business Office Manager Boot Camp will continue in the spring of 2024. There are also on-demand versions of each boot camp for those who simply can't attend the live virtual programs.
All boot camps, including the on-demand boot camps, include access to resources, membership in the ASC-Central patron program, copies of John's latest books, access to credentialing, conditions for coverage, and other recorded training programs, and of course our regular drop-in Zoom sessions where you can ask questions and interact with other patron and boot camp members.
Our programs also include AEU credits for those that are CASC certified. Our programs are comprehensive and taught by the nation's leading ASC experts and are designed for all levels of leadership, from experienced leaders who want to enhance their skills or pass the CASC exam, or those who are new to the industry and wish to learn how to run an ASC.
For more information about our live, virtual, and on-demand programs, visit ASC-Central at asc-central.com. Or you can call us at 585-594-1167 or email us at info@ascpodcast.com for more information. So as we always do when we're talking about a regulatory requirement, we go right back to the conditions for coverage, which, as all of you know, I'm sure, are the Medicare regulations that govern your Medicare certification. So the conditions for coverage that relate to credentialing include the condition for coverage for surgical services, which is 416.42. Sue, why don't you repeat what the regulation states?
Okay. Surgical procedures must be performed in a safe manner by qualified physicians who have been granted clinical privileges by the governing body of the ASC in accordance with approved policies and procedures of the ASC.
So this brings up the question, what are surveyors going to be looking for with regard to this particular condition? First of all, the surveyors will determine whether the ASC has policies and procedures that establish the criteria and the process the governing body uses when granting surgical privileges to a physician. And they're going to ask for documentation that the governing body has approved those policies and procedures. Now, often the policies that are related to credentialing are actually going to be included in your medical staff bylaws, as we talked about earlier in our first segment. So it is important that you look at both your policies and procedures for credentialing and privileging as well as your medical staff bylaws.
And the surveyors will ask the ASC to identify each physician who currently has surgical privileges or has had surgical privileges within the previous 6 months. They'll ask the ASC for documentation of the governing body's action to grant privileges to each of these physicians.
And usually that's going to be documented in the governing body minutes. And for each surgical case record that is reviewed as part of the survey team's medical record review, they're going to verify that the individual performing the surgery was a physician who had been granted privileges by the ASC's governing body. Now, credentialing also is governed by the condition for coverage related to medical staff, and that's 416.45. Sue, what does that state?
The medical staff of the ASC must be accountable to the governing body. Standard A, membership and clinical privileges. Members of the medical staff must be legally and professionally qualified for the positions to which they are appointed and for the performance of privileges granted. The ASC grants privileges in accordance with recommendations from qualified medical personnel. And Standard B, reappraisals. Medical staff privileges must be periodically reappraised by the ASC. The scope of procedures performed in the ASC must be periodically reviewed and amended as appropriate. And Standard C, other practitioners. If the ASC assigns patient care responsibilities to practitioners other than physicians, it must have established policies and procedures approved by the governing body for overseeing and evaluating their clinical activities.
So again, let's go to the interpretive guidelines that state what the surveyors are going to be looking for. So the surveyors are going to ask the ASC's leadership to explain its process for granting clinical privileges. And they're going to want to look at, again, the policies, and they'll review a number of charts. They will review a sample of files to verify that the medical staff has been granted clinical privileges. And they're going to expect to see at a minimum the following documentation: a state license and registration or state certification as applicable, certification by a specialty organization as appropriate, other training or pertinent experience, evidence of a recommendation by qualified medical personnel concerning the practitioner's competence, and then a scope of privileges or a delineation of privileges that has been requested by the practitioner and approved by the governing body. And if the governing body granted privileges against the recommendation of a qualified medical personnel, the rationale for doing that, that's pretty rare, I certainly hope. Mm-hmm. And then the surveyors will determine whether the ASC's review of each practitioner's record provides evidence that they are legally and professionally qualified to exercise the privileges granted by the ASC. So it's very important that that credential file includes all of that information as well as primary source verification. And so here's a couple other things that you really want to watch out for. The governing body minutes need to reflect the privileging of those providers. You want to use the term privileging. You don't want to state in the governing body that they've credentialed providers. Credentialing is the process of reviewing the file, the primary source verification of the credentials of that individual. So you want to use the term privileging in the governing body minutes when you're granting privileges. You want to show the exact name of the provider and the dates those privileges were granted. And I'm talking about really very specific dates, like not a month, but the actual day of the week. And you have to make sure that the time frame meets the CMS, the state, or the accreditation time frame, as we talked about in our first segment. That's going to be either 2 or 3 years. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that the governing body needs to meet more frequently than annually, because most likely you're going to have providers that are being granted privileges throughout the year. And you want to investigate any issues, any malpractice cases, any licensing or privileging issues, and address it in the credential file. So, and then include in your minutes that all of that information has been reviewed, and based upon the review of the credential file, you've granted privileges to that individual. So primary source verification is also extremely important. And we actually did an entire conference, a day-and-a-half conference in January, which we'll provide a link to in the show notes here, which gives you a lot of information about how to actually perform this. It's quite involved, obviously, and you really want to make sure that all of your providers have been properly vetted, which means not just relying upon the information that they provided in their application, but also checking with the state to make sure that they have a current license, checking with the hospitals that they have current privileges, if that's applicable, checking with the specialty board that they're a member of to make sure that their board certification, if that is something that you require, is current. And, of course, following up on any malpractice cases that might still be outstanding to determine if there's any potential problems or any concerns that you might have or that the organization might have with granting privileges to this individual that might have some past history of problems. And we also need to point out that when it comes to recredentialing, you're going to want to make sure you do a full peer review. And we'll do a podcast on peer review at some time in the future here, just to remind you how important peer review, a good, robust peer review program is in your organization. During the New Jersey State Association, I had an opportunity to meet with Amanda Penrod, our friend from RFX Solutions. She did a speech during the conference about documentation in the credential files. And I did have an opportunity to interview her based upon that speech that she did. And I'm going to include that interview right now.
So I'm here at the 14th Annual New Jersey State Association meeting at the Palace at Somerset Park in New Jersey. And I'm here with my dear, dear friend, Amanda Penrod. Amanda, you and I met a couple years ago and immediately connected. We're both small business owners, and though your business is a lot bigger than mine now, but we have a lot in common, and we've been in this industry for a long time. And you tell us a little bit about your company and you.
Well, John, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
And I'm excited to be here again. And yes, so I'm CEO and founder of RFX Solutions. So we're regulatory compliance software, and been in the industry for about 25 years now myself, but excited to be here today and really talk on the subject of credentialing and that here in New Jersey and with these teams and administrators here. So.
And we met because, for those that are not aware, RFX is our back office system, for many of our clients. You mentioned you're in regulatory compliance. Of course, we're the nation's leading firm in regulatory compliance oversight. So that's how we met up, and that's where we found a solution. And one of the things that we all know has happened recently is credentialing's gone through some changes. There was a company out there that Silver Sheets that did a great job, and then went out of business in December. And you kind of picked up the bandwagon from them, didn't you? You created a system to be able to port information over to your system. And but I think the more important conversation here is about credentialing and how you do it right and how you make sure that it's really all about the documentation, isn't it? So and that's what your session was on. So your session was titled Understanding and Avoiding Common Pitfalls of Credentialing. So talk a little bit about what, by the way, you haven't actually done the speech yet as we're recording this.
I have not actually talked yet, but I'm very excited. So yes, a lot of it about documentation, but something else very passionate that I'm very passionate about, as well as the company, and then what I'm going to talk about today is really what drives us. And while the documentation is very important, I'm going to talk a lot about the true purpose behind it, because
that's a good point.
People are constantly going, okay, I've got to do this to pass my survey. But at the end of the day, it's really about patient safety and having quality surgeons and that in our centers. And so we're going to talk, when I talk about those common pitfalls, I want to give them more of that why behind the what of what we're doing. And so obviously they're going to get educated in terms of, different components and that of, but I'm also going to focus on that risk and their responsibility. So.
Right, and indeed, that's something that's near and dear to my heart. We have a full day. Those of you that did not know, many of our listeners attended our January Credentialing and Peer Review Conference, and that is still available on ASC-Central.com if anybody's interested. But it was one of our most popular conferences. As a matter of fact, if I looked at the data, it's probably our most popular conference ever, simply because this is an area that every center has a problem. Almost every center is going to have some type of citation. But Amanda, you said something so important, and I'm on the legal side sometimes. I do expert witnessing for organizations that have gotten into trouble or been sued as a result of a malpractice suit that the plaintiff's attorney is saying you shouldn't have credentialed this person. So that's the crux of it. Talk a little bit about how you not doing a good job of credentialing can end up with some bad providers.
Well, the biggest thing, and so kind of two-pronged here a little bit. One, it's a very difficult, it's not, let me just say this, it's not a difficult paper process, it's just a very tedious, time-consuming. There's, as you know, there's a lot of components with that, which is why then, for us with RFX, being able to leverage software and tracking mechanisms, some of those automations and that around also making sure, in the sanctions or OIG licensure and continuously monitoring it. But even a step forward into this is the ability to be able to review and know what's happening real time, but also as they're getting ready to look at taking the credentialing, which is the verification process, and to actually privilege them to be able to do privileges, it's reviewing all that information to determine, is this person trained? Right. Some of the examples that I'm going to talk about today, there's obviously the big case in Texas with Dr. Death. I'm going to do a video on that because I want them to stop and think with all the growth that we have in ASCs, more specialties coming in. But on top of that, another example I'm going to give them is talking about a particular organization a couple of years ago who had an ENT who wanted to go into oculoplastics and really never had training in it. But here they're at an ASC and it's a paper process. It's easy for these things to slip through the cracks. Right. And we just think, service, and I want to provide another opportunity for revenue, or they're getting some pressure. But at the end of the day, do they really have that training? And for us, it's the education piece and then giving them the tools so they really can verify and make sure that happens. But I'm going to talk a lot about that with them today and what that means.
Well, you bring up a very important point, too. You and I are administrator types, right? We do not have the skills. We're smart people. Well, you're smart. I'm not. But
no, we're both smart people. Very smart people.
But the point
we're
being,
not clinical.
That's exactly right.
Neither you or I mean, we've got operational backgrounds.
Yeah.
I mean, very strong business acumen, but I'm not a clinician by background.
I can't tell whether Dr. Death was a good doctor or not until the lawsuits came.
Correct.
And that's where and your point is so well taken, is that many of us, I was involved in credentialing, you were involved in credentialing,
Absolutely.
But we didn't make that final decision. Our job was to vet the information and make sure that and we always had to bring the medical director into it, or specialty people into it. And that goes for even people that are lower, because we always use a lot of administrative people to do some of that paperwork. But you can't stop there. You can't just do that and then hand it to the board at the board meeting. It's got to go through a real vetting process.
And there's so much truth in what you're also with. We hand off and we have expectations. Even our credentialing specialists, I know I had one that was full time, or we're bringing in paperwork from a CBO.
Yeah,
we really have to stop and go, okay, I'm responsible for this due diligence, but then I'm also responsible for where are my red flags, where are my problems, what am I, looking at in terms of are there inconsistencies, are there gaps in it, how do I strengthen that, and then as I'm passing that packet forward, making sure that I'm identifying this so it also doesn't get missed to that medical director or, to the committees that are vetting this out before we sign off to say, you know what, this person can come in here to do the procedures. And when we see some of these other things happen in the industry, it often is just lack of time. Sometimes it's just lack of knowledge. Or we're just thinking we're just checking boxes and we're doing this because the paperwork is to meet credentialing, for accreditation or survey. And we actually hear that a lot from clients. Are like, well, I have to do this because the surveyor expects it. And it's,
and I'm going to get cited if I don't do it right.
And while it's the truth that, yes, we need that but why is the surveyor? Why are accrediting bodies looking at it? And it truly is for patient safety and quality of care.
Right.
And it's just helping to shift that mindset.
You bring up a very important point. You're talking about CVOs, and I have a pet peeve about a lot of CVOs. As a surveyor, I can't tell you a number of times I've come in and the administrator said to me, "Oh, don't worry, paperwork's perfect because the CVO took care of it." And then, first of all, immediately my guard is up because I know that they often... Yeah. Well, the problem is you're not actually outsourcing any of the decision making. They're basically gathering the information, sending it back to you. And again, this is not something you take directly from the CVO and then hand to the board. Somebody's got to look at that information and make a determination, because they're not going to tell. They're going to gather the information. If there's something that's suspicious in there, they might have flagged it for you, but they're not making the ultimate decision. So the CVO is only a processing organization.
Yeah, and because just industry as a whole, I think there's a lot of work to be done, in helping to educate.
Yeah.
That we really have to start taking those extra steps. And again, with all the growth that's going on in the ASC, and now we have more, cardio that's going, and we've added, shoulders for, totals, et cetera. These are more complicated procedures, even though we're able to start to do them safer and better than what we've done in the past. We're going to be doing more and more of this in that environment. And so we really have to educate a lot more on really why we're doing it and that purpose, and helping empower them with the tools and better tracking systems and technology to manage that process.
Now, this is a very paperwork intensive process. There's a lot of information to gather. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be like you and I as administrators, we always had people that did the work behind, but we managed that process. And again, even if you're using a CVO, and by the way, Amanda, as you know, even with your great software, all you're doing is, don't mean to say it that way, but your software gathers the information, stores the information, but you still have to do something with it.
No, that's absolutely. Right. It's even if we're using, whether it's a CVO, whether they're using technology,
right.
The onus of the due diligence still belongs to that administrator. Yeah. And then ultimately to those decision-making individuals on, your medical exec committees, your committees, however that's structured in your governing body, and medical director. So, the work is the decision-making work doesn't rest in any of those other components.
You did mention the podcast, Dr. Death, and I believe there's a television series now. Is it on Netflix or something like that? I really highly recommend anybody that's an administrator, director of nursing, and even your credentialing coordinator. Not only go to our conference, but listen to that. And first of all, it is entertaining, but it is frightening. I didn't walk away from that feeling comfortable. I felt like, boy, that's my responsibility.
So today you'll appreciate, they're actually going to get to watch the trailer for 2 minutes.
Are they?
Yes, they are. And because I think it's important, and it's not to dramatize, it's to help them realize that these incidents and issues, and this is not isolated to this.
Right.
We've had other, the Putnam Medical Center in West Virginia, that's been about 20 years ago. That was a major one. Put an organization. We've got narcotic. We had the plastics who, that just happened here, recently in the last couple of years. And the situation with the wife was never even trained. We're seeing these type of incidences and things that happen. And I, fully anticipate that, if we don't put these better processes and educate more inside our ASCs, we'll continue to see that climb, because they understand that there's even more opportunity to manipulate those systems, coming in there. And so it's just helping them. So today that's going to be part of that education.
At least it'll be slightly entertaining. Well,
yes, it'll be a little bit, but it is still frightening. But I want them to understand it's more than credentialing, or not credentialing, but more than the accreditation types of processes, that there's a bigger why behind what we're doing.
And negligent credentialing is that legal term that they use right now for organizations that have been sued by the plaintiff's attorney, making an allegation that the doctor should never have been credentialed at your organization. And that is that's becoming a more common part of those malpractice cases. So that's one of the you're right. You got to do the right thing, but that's one of the other things that is happening.
The risk that we're carrying.
That's your risk. And we know that if we're not doing a good vetting, you're going to have a problem. And you also mentioned something that I kind of touched on this. One thing that I've been worrying about, we're finding doctors, because the technology is changing the types of procedures we're doing, different ways of doing these procedures. And we're a surgery center. We don't have a training program. We don't have mentoring programs. we could develop them, but do we really want to get into that? So that's what makes it so important that we're vetting them through other sources, such as identifying that the hospital is granted them privileges, going to their peers to get references indicating that they've been trained,
Absolutely.
showing educational, not only the education and training, but that they've done these procedures somewhere else. So that should be an important part of that process too.
And absolutely. And, for many of them, as I, in the example I gave, with that ENT, it's, for them in that particular center, all of a sudden they start questioning that training. And we need to be. And if we don't have verifiable proof that this training has existed, whether it's through, to your point, hospital privileges, through peer references or any formalized training programs, then that's a red flag. And granting them, puts those patients at risk. And then ultimately, to your point, from a liability standpoint, that center's at risk too. Because if we're granting those privileges, we're saying that we've vetted them and that we know that they're qualified to do this, and we feel comfortable saying that the majority of instances, patients are going to get a quality outcome. And, that puts us at a huge risk when things do go wrong. So.
And let's just finish by kind of touching on peer review for a minute, because I think that's one of those areas.
That's a whole big topic.
Is.
Yes.
Yeah, we can't talk about it here in depth, but that, after you've initially credentialed somebody, you've got to track it. You got to look at that quality improvement data and really determine whether you've got a problem or not.
Absolutely.
And not be afraid to address it.
Absolutely. And that is one of the, actually one of my common pitfalls. I don't dive very deep in it because that's a whole, as you and I both know, session on that. But talk to them about the fact that a lot of times, those KPIs and those quality metrics, because it's depending on the credentialing or the, privileging period of 2 or 3 years, we're having to maintain that data for the entire rolling time and then aggregating it to understand what type of quality provider, are they in that organization. And too many times either we don't want to address it or we've had, individuals leave and we don't have good tracking mechanisms around it. And so we end up with gaps there too.
Yeah, and that's something that, I listen to our listeners periodically. We get calls, and this seems to be a problem that is increasing, or maybe we're more cognizant of it, that people are coming to me and saying, I've got a provider that we really don't want here anymore. And of course, the first thing I say is, why is that provider there?
Yes.
Didn't you know something beforehand? Didn't you suspect that? And, usually it's process that was probably rushed through very quickly. And it's so much more difficult to get somebody out afterwards that you don't want there. And it just gets to the heart of doing good credentialing in the first place, tracking them as they're going along, and then either, working with them to fix their skills if they're, not up there, or, kind of encouraging them to find another place to go and work.
Yes.
So. Amanda, it's been a pleasure as always talking to you. Just so everybody knows, more to come between Amanda and our company. We got a lot of exciting things going on.
I really enjoy working with you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In this segment, we provide an update on upcoming topics for the podcast, our upcoming virtual conferences, and upcoming speaking engagements for John and his staff and other events in the ASC industry.
So don't forget the Administrators Bootcamp. The virtual Administrators Bootcamp is going to be July 16th through the 19th. For more information about that, visit ASC-Central.com. The Administrators Bootcamp has really become the industry standard for training new administrators in their role, and also in helping to prepare administrators to be able to take the CASC exam, the Certified Ambulatory Surgery Center certification exam.
The Florida Society of Ambulatory Surgery Centers annual conference and trade show is July 17th through the 19th in Orlando, Florida, at the Signia by Hilton, Orlando, Bonnet Creek.
The Texas Ambulatory Surgery Center Society's annual conference is July 24th through the 26th in Galveston, Texas at the San Luis Resort, Spa, and Conference Center.
The Georgia Society of ASCs and South Carolina ASC Association's joint semi-annual conference and trade show is August 15th and 16th in Hilton Head, South Carolina at the Marriott Hilton Head Resort and Spa.
The 2024 Illinois Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers annual meeting is going to be held August 22nd through the 23rd at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois. And I'm going to be doing a ASC Administrators Workshop. It's a 4-hour workshop during that conference.
The California Ambulatory Surgery Association's annual conference is September 4th through 6th in Anaheim, California at the Anaheim Marriott.
The Tennessee Ambulatory Surgery Center Association's annual conference is September 12th through the 13th in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Chattanoogan.
The New York State Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers annual conference is September 17th and 18th at the Desmond Hotel in Albany, New York.
And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies will be doing the pre-conference, which is 3 hours of AEUs on Monday the 16th, the day before the conference starts.
The Becker's ASC 30th annual meeting, The Business and Operations of ASCs, is October 30th through November 2nd in Chicago, Illinois at the Hyatt Regency.
And the Washington Ambulatory Surgery Association's 2024 Annual Education Conference and Trade Show will be November 7th through the 8th, 2024 at the Tulalip Resort and Spa in Tulalip, Washington. And I'll be speaking about accreditation and will provide an update on accreditation trends. Don't forget, there are on-demand versions of our ASC Director of Nursing, the ASC Administrators, and the ASC Business Office Managers bootcamps. And you can get information about those on-demand versions at ASC-Central.com. We do want to remind everyone to become a patron member of the podcast. The patron member program, which is available at ASC-Central.com, is an exclusive membership website that provides a one-stop ASC regulatory and accreditation, compliance, operations, and financial management resource for busy administrators, nurse managers, and business office managers. And in addition to our regular, usually weekly drop-in Zoom sessions on Saturday mornings with other patron members and the staff of the podcast, there's additional patron resources that includes various virtual conferences, such as our credentialing conference, conditions for coverage conference, et cetera, as well as example policies and procedures, example forms, and our famous fire and disaster drill kits. Patron membership helps to defray the costs of producing the podcast, including our research staff, travel costs to conferences, equipment costs, and production costs. For more information, please visit ASC-Central.com. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle. If you found the episode informative, we encourage you to share it with your friends and colleagues in the ASC industry. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We would love any feedback about our episode or ideas for future episodes by sending us an email at comments@ascpodcast.com. We'd like to give a special thank you to our great team here who make the podcast possible. Our sound editor, Susan Cronkite, our executive producer, John Goehle, and our dedicated research team of Sue Cronkite, Jenna Alvarez, Judy D'Ambrosio, Mike D'Ambrosio, Alex Borneman, Zach Caloritis, Jim Masters, Amy Cronkite, Lori Rodricks, Kathy Fode, Donna Macchio, and Christina Norman. We couldn't do it without them. Our music is provided by Media Sushi and Mike Noah, and the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is hosted on Podbean and is available on all major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening. This episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, providing cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence, offering a comprehensive and next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable data insights. MedServe, which offers the only digital narcotic cabinet specifically designed and priced for surgery centers, helping standardize processes and compliance, eliminate paper logs, and prevent drug diversion. And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, which is the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For information about any of our sponsors, please visit our website at ascpodcast.com. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development. All rights are reserved. If you're interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. And we'd love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.